day! Big day. You know how big it is? We'll explain the shofar momentarily. Let's light up the darkness. Ooh, so much going on, so many things to cover today. Big day, big day. Who's in the house with us? Who's tuning in? Let's blow that shofar again. Oh, my holy brothers and sisters. Got a big day. Who is tuning in? Where are you tuning in from? Who's in the house with us? We always want to know. When you comment, hit the likes and shares. Signals to Facebook we're lighting up the darkness with something of value, and then more people get to see it. Very valuable. When you react, give a Facebook reaction, more people get to see it. It's a big mitzvah. Who's going to be first to tell us where they're tuning in from? Who's going to mention it in the comments? I want to see that. Who's in the house? Today we're going to be talking about some amazing things. It is Miriam Jacob from Hayden, Colorado is first. And who is it? James from Indianapolis. And Tifigo says, hello, sir. And Tina Reichbach Ben Haim from Yerushalayim. The holy city is in the house. Beautiful, beautiful. We've got a lot to cover today. And we don't want to have an overlong show. So I'm just going to get into it. But please keep mentioning in the comments where you're tuning in from, what you're learning, what you're excited about. Sharon Ashford from Kennesaw, Georgia. Kennesaw, that's one of those place names that you hear when you learn about the Civil War. Am I right? And today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, the great unifier. So let us dedicate today's learning to Abraham Lincoln. Nina and I are very attached to Lincoln. Some of you know, you can even see the poster back there. We made a movie about Abraham Lincoln called Saving Lincoln. And we were just so inspired by Abraham Lincoln. And so let's dedicate today's learning to him. Okay, today is Wednesday. It's the fourth day of the week, right, of the Hebrew week, which begins on Sunday. And if you divide each week's Torah portion into 7 parts, right, to 7 aliyahs, when we go to synagogue on Shabbat, and we read the Torah before the congregation, so there are 7 people called up to make a blessing over, the whole Torah portion that is divided into 7 parts. And we can also apply those 7 parts to the 7 days of the week in which that parsha is given over, that Torah portion. So in today's section, because this week is Torah portion Yitro, right, Jethro in English, and this is the Torah portion in which the 10 Commandments are given. This Shabbat, when we're in synagogue and the 10 Commandments are actually read aloud from the Torah, we will all stand up, which we don't normally do during the Torah reading. But to hear the recital of the 10 Commandments directly from the Torah, everybody rises. And in telling this story of God appearing on Mount Sinai, and speaking to the people directly. Actually, that was for the first 2 commandments, and then the people just couldn't take it anymore. The power and the divinity of the Holy One was just too great. And they said to Moses, basically, we're afraid we're going to die, that our souls are going to fly from our bodies if we keep hearing the voice of the Lord. So since you obviously can hear the voice of the Lord and survive, please take dictation from us. The Lord will tell it to you and you'll tell it to us. And so then Moses ascends on the mountain and is there for 40 days and nights and receives not only the rest of the commandments, the whole 10 commandments inscribed on the 2 tablets, but also the entire Torah. And in the course of these events happening at Exodus chapter 19, God says to Moses, "You must say the following to the house of Jacob and relate it to the Israelites." Now this is really beautiful. The Lubavitcher Rebbe actually learns out from this verse, you must say the following to the house of Jacob and relate it to the Israelites, right? And what is Moses being told to tell to the house of Jacob and to relate to the Israelites? The Torah, right? So the Torah is being given, and the command is to the house of Jacob and to the Israelites. So the house of Jacob is mentioned first. What does the house of Jacob mean? You might think it means, the Jewish people, but that is not what it means. What the house of Jacob means is, because this is a kind of a euphemism that is often used in the Torah, the house of a man refers to his wife, right? And it's not that the Torah is being sexist and refusing to name the name of the wife, but it's issues of modesty and, it's from the ancient world, and perhaps that was the custom then. But the point here is that Moses is told first that the higher priority is to give the Torah over to the women and then to the men, right? Now later, when all this is being given down, the sages would decide that women are not obligated in Torah study the way that men are obligated, because women have obligations to the children that are beyond their control, right? Anybody who has kids in the house knows that those kids can get completely out of control at any moment and have all kinds of demands that they make on the caretaker. And so, women would just go insane if they had the same time-bound positive commandments as the men do, because, like somebody's got to be available when the kids make their own demands. But the Rebbe learns out from this that, in the ancient world, life was just so hard, right? It's like each household, so many things that we just order on Amazon now, like somebody in the house had to, not just make the bread, but grind the wheat into flour often, that then would become the bread, or sew the clothes that people are wearing. Life was just much harder and more demanding on the homemaker. Now that we live in a world where there's greater convenience, right? So women actually have more control over their time. And as a result of that, women are engaging in Torah study much more than they used to, right? It's another aspect of the world, kind of elevating itself and moving, sort of out of more ancient customs and ideas about how to run the world, and more into the modern age. And the Rebbe says, and that's great, right? That's wonderful. There's some things that we preserve the old ways, but in this, that women are learning more Torah, the Rebbe says it's a wonderful thing, and it's actually one of the signs that Mashiach is coming, that the redemption is coming, right? So the more women learn Torah, the better. And we learn that out from a verse in today's seventh of this week's Torah portion. So since I know that here in our accidental Talmudist audience, we just have a huge number of women learning Torah on a daily basis, I just want to commend you and shkoyach, meaning may you are strong and may you be strengthened to continue to learn and to enhance your Torah learning every day, and to share what you learn with your families and your friends and with everybody who would appreciate Torah. Okay, we are holding on page 40 of Berachos, right? So we're in the first volume of the Talmud, and now we're on page 40. We're in chapter 6. We've been studying the particular blessings that we say over food. And as we mentioned yesterday, the more specific one can be in blessing God for the goodness that we've been given, the better, right? So there are some catch-all general blessings, like, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. That's the catch-all blessing. In Hebrew, shehakol nihiyeh b'divaro. And that is the correct blessing for meat, for fish, for eggs. But when we eat a vegetable, there's a more specific blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who makes fruit come from the ground, right? Who makes the fruit of the ground. And there's an even more specific blessing for fruit from a tree that's considered more specific and higher priority. And that would be the fruit of the tree. What is a fruit of a tree? It's fruit that you take from a branch, and after you've taken it, the branch is still alive, right? As opposed to a lettuce, you take that off the ground, it's like you took the plant, right? Or when you harvest a cactus to make tequila, right? Like you kill the cactus and take its heart in order to make a tequila. But of course, when you take an apple or a fig from a tree, so the tree is still there, and that's fruit of the tree. Grain is considered an even higher and more specific blessing, and then bread and wine are the highest. All right? Now, if we make a blessing, for example, over bread. So now let's talk about the hamotzi blessing. This is what we do for sure Friday night and Saturday lunch. So we're going to make a motzi at our Shabbos table, right? And we're going to, before we eat the bread, first we're going to wash our hands and say a blessing over that. But then we're going to say this blessing, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth bread from the ground. Once we've said the blessing, we do not want to interrupt before we eat the bread, nor take an overlong pause. So today, in today's page, our sages discuss, what sort of interruption would cancel out the fact that we've said the blessing and we need to repeat the blessing. So, if you say the blessing over the bread and then you say, oh, by the way, did the Giants win today? So then you interrupt it and you have to say the blessing again. But if you said, oh, there's no salt on the table, so that would not be an interruption because we have to eat salt with the bread. In fact, we have to have salt on our table when we have a meal. Why is salt so important? Because our table, particularly our Shabbos table, but really our dinner table, the family table at any time, represents and actually is the altar. Once the temple was destroyed, we lost the altar on which we brought the offerings, and it was replaced since then, since our exile, since we lost the temple. Since then, for the last 2,000 years, the altar is the family table. And just as there was salt brought with offerings by the priests in the temple, so too we have to have salt on the table. Why was salt included in the offerings? Why is salt itself so important on the table? Because salt, God said to Aaron that I'm making a covenant of salt with you. Aaron was Moses' brother and the first high priest. And when God said, I make the covenant of salt with you, he was using an item, salt, right, which does not spoil. Salt never goes bad, so it's lasting and it's wholesome. We need a certain amount of salt in our diet. If you had no salt at all, your body would have serious problems. And not only is it lasting and wholesome, but as Rashi tells us, salt is something that is lasting and wholesome and makes other things wholesome, keeps other things wholesome, right? Salt is used as a preservative. Right? In the old days, they didn't have refrigerators. Meat would spoil very quickly. But if you salted the meat, right, the raw meat, so then it would last. And you could keep it for some time before you had the opportunity to eat it, right? So that is why we always have salt with our challah at the Shabbos table. And when we're eating bread the rest of the week, it is also appropriate to put some salt with the bread. The Talmud also says, or relish, meaning something that has salt in it, and you could dip the bread into that. We can also interrupt between the blessing and eating the bread. Now, we're not supposed to interrupt at all. The correct way is you say the blessing, you eat the bread. But if you have such an interruption after the fact, it will not negate the connection between the blessing and the eating, right? So the interruption for salt was such a, permitted interruption after the fact. And another permitted interruption after the fact is, did you feed the animal? Particularly, did you feed the ox? Or quick, feed the ox. What? Doesn't that sound strange? Quick, feed the ox? and we're going to interrupt our, the connection between saying the blessing and eating our bread. But the answer is feeding the ox is very important. And we learn that out from the second paragraph of the Shema that we recite every day when we say, the Lord will give grass in the field for your animals, and you shall eat and be satisfied, right? That's if we keep the commandments as a people and we live in the Holy Land, we're going to be able to keep the land. And so if we live correctly, and how do we live correctly? One of the things that will happen is if you love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, etc., then we're living correctly. And another thing is, right, that we feed the animals and then we will eat and be satisfied. So we actually have an obligation that is a Torah obligation to make sure that our animals are fed even before we are. Right now, this is quite unexpected. I mean, certainly we learn out from the Torah that animals are not on the level of people. We eat animals, and that is permitted, and that's a good thing. But we never make an animal suffer when it is our power to alleviate its suffering, right? So the Torah is by no means advocating that we all be vegetarians or vegans. However, we must be kind to the animals. There's other rules that we'll learn out, in the future in our cycle of Talmud study, that you also unload an animal from its burden, and that's an important commandment. But here we're learning that you feed the animals first, and then you feed yourself. You don't let the animal go hungry while you're enjoying your meal. Okay. Continuing in what I started to say yesterday. So if you mistakenly make a blessing, let's say the blessing over meat, which is by whose word everything comes into being, and you said that over something more specific, like a vegetable or a fruit, or even bread and wine, which is sort of their own category because they're so important. So if you said the wrong blessing, you said the general catch-all blessing over something that has its own blessing, what do? You've made a mistake. Have you fulfilled your obligation to bless the food before you eat it? Answer, yes, you have fulfilled your obligation. You said the wrong blessing, but after the fact, even though it's not preferable, even though you want to train yourself to say the right blessing over the right food, if you said the catch-all blessing over something that is more specific and should have had its own blessing, then you have fulfilled your obligation. And this is a kind of approach to blessings that we're going to see quite a bit. That it's preferable to do it right, but after the fact, if you did it, in this particular way, you fulfilled your obligation. On the other hand, if you said a blessing over a fruit of the tree, and then you ate a vegetable, so now you're not covered, right? Because the fruit of the tree does not apply to the vegetable. The fruit of the tree is more specific than the blessing for the vegetable. And so you did not say a blessing that covers your obligation for the vegetable. Got it? And then with bread and wine, they had that question, right? Since bread and wine are like this very special category that we have a pretty high and lofty and important blessing whenever we eat a grain product. And if there's a cracker and a steak on our plate, this we learned yesterday, right? If you have a cracker and a steak, which should you say the blessing over? You would think that the steak, which maybe you love and tastes great and is more ample and is super expensive, and it's like that's the real gift that you've been given. But actually, that the blessing for the steak is the generic catch-all blessing by whose word everything comes into being. And the cracker, which is made from a grain, has that specific blessing, who makes the various types of nourishment, borei minei mazonos. You'd actually make the blessing over the cracker and then move on to the steak. Bread is even higher than a general grain product. It's the most very specific blessing, the most important. Bread is what, if possible, right, we wash, we bless the bread, and then we eat a meal. And then if we've done that, then after we ate the meal, we do the full grace after meal. But if you made a blessing, the general catch-all, Shakol Nihebadivaro, by whose word everything comes into being, over bread, you did the wrong thing, but your obligation is fulfilled after the fact. Now here comes something really interesting. As we're figuring out, I just want to see what my connection is to this. So right now we're talking about, if we made a blessing over a fruit of the tree, then does that exempt a fruit of the ground, right? And there we said it didn't. Or if you made a blessing over, let's say you made a blessing over a cracker, over a grain, but you had no grain there. The only thing you were eating was vegetables. So then you made the wrong blessing, and the specific blessing for the grain product does not fulfill your obligation for eating the vegetables. Now, regarding trees and fruit of the tree, we're told that we might have thought that the wheat product is exempted by saying a fruit of the tree per Rabbi Yehuda, because in a related teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, we learn, what did Adam and Eve eat in the garden, right? What did they eat? They ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And then they were kicked out of the garden before they ate from the tree of life. So the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what was that tree? We often see it represented as an apple tree in paintings. This is wrong. There's no discussion of apples. In the Torah, the apple is not a fruit which comes up. So our sages discuss, well, what was the tree that Adam and Eve ate from in the garden? Rabbi Meir says it was the vine, meaning the grapevine. Why? Because we have nothing but trouble with the fruit of the vine, because we make it into wine and we get intoxicated. And Rabbi Meir cites the trouble that Noah got into, right? Noah was like the holiest man on earth, the only one worth saving, along with his family, when the whole world, all the people in the world were destroyed at the time of the flood because they were so corrupt. But after the flood and the ark and the 40 days and nights of rain and floating on that sea for many days after that, and eventually the flood recedes and Noah and his family walk off the ark, what did Noah do? He planted a vineyard, he made wine, he got drunk, and there was problems. We'll just leave that story at that. So Rabbi Meir definitely warns against intoxication. Rabbi Nehemiah says the tree in the garden, the tree of knowledge, was a fig tree. Why? Because remember that when they realized that they were naked, what did they do? They put a fig leaf on themselves to cover their nakedness. And so Rabbi Nehemiah learns out that the tree which caused the corruption also brought the rehabilitation, right? So by the same fruit that caused them to know they were naked, on that same tree, they took the leaf to cover their nakedness. It's a nice idea, spiritually speaking, that when I think, what leads us to sin, right? This is the Yetzer Hara, it's the evil inclination. If we would examine ourselves, after we've transgressed, after we've done something wrong, we shouldn't just say, oh, I'm sorry, move on, right? You need to think about what led me to do that, right? And very often we'll find that the urge that brought one to sin contains within it a spark of holiness. There was something good that we were trying to pursue. We kind of went off the rails and ran for pleasure, basically. But if we can get back to where we were and understand, what is the holy spark within that urge, and then nurture that, that desire, then we can really start to elevate our lives and live on a higher plane. And finally, Rabbi Yehuda said the tree, right, the tree of knowledge in the garden was wheat. It was a kind of wheat, which is unexpected. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean by that? And he says, well, because a child does not know how to call its mother and father, can't speak, right, with words to distinguish mother and father until, it's old enough to have eaten of grain, right? When the child is nursing, it can cry, but it's not speaking. And around the time that it starts eating, and particularly eating a grain product, is about the time that it starts speaking. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda says, but the sages say, yeah, no, wheat is not a tree, and we can't exempt a wheat product with a tree blessing. Okay? And finally, we learn from Rav in this page, on page 40 in the Talmud, that when we recite a blessing, if we're Jewish, the correct way to recite the blessing is to use the formula of the sages and to say it in Hebrew. But if we say the blessing in our own language, we have fulfilled our obligation. And if we change the formula, if we don't say, for example, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth the bread from the earth, but rather we said something like, oh God, you are the king of the world, and you are so sweet and good to me, and I bless you for being so loving and for giving us this bread, right? So like a nice blessing in our own words. We made it up, right? We totally changed the formula of the sages. So Rav says we have fulfilled our obligation by making such a blessing, so long as we thank God for the specific thing that we're blessing him for, we mention God's name, and we mention that God is sovereign over all the world. Those are the actual requirements of a blessing. But note, as we said earlier, while there are formulas and ways to say things that are acceptable after the fact, it is not the correct way. And we want to strive to sort of improve ourselves and be able to do things in the correct way, right? So if Hebrew is beyond us, at least we want to say the blessing according to the formula of the sages. Saying it in our own words might, from time to time, give us some spiritual uplift, but saying it with the formula of the sages binds us to this ancient tradition, right? And puts us in that tradition. And so even though it's not in our own words, by saying it in that formula, eventually we'll come to understand that formula better, and we honor our ancestors who came before us by doing it their way. And that's why, we're very careful not to tell people to change traditions that they've received from their parents, right? Receiving a tradition, a Jewish tradition from your parents is very important, very holy. We don't, as long as it's within, the parameters of the law, then it is best to do things the way it's received from your parents, because that's a way of fulfilling the fifth commandment, right? To honor your mother and father. And interestingly, when we look, since we are in the week of the 10 Commandments, and I started this show by blowing the shofar, I'm going to do it again, right? Because we are in the week of the receiving of the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai in Torah portion Yisro, right? Jethro. It's named after Jethro, the Torah portion that has the 10 Commandments in it. And when the people were at Mount Sinai, we learn out from the Torah that they saw thunder. It says that. The language is they saw thunder. What? You hear thunder. But it says they saw thunder, right? Here the Lubavitcher Rebbe also comments that the difference between seeing and hearing is when we see something, okay, we get it. We accept it, we believe it, we saw it with our own eyes. When we hear something, it's like we're hearing about something. We're hearing that something happened somewhere else. And as much as we trust the person who's telling it to us, okay, it's something we heard and we choose to believe it. As opposed to when we see it, we just naturally believe it, right? God is this way in our lives. God is something we hear about. We rarely see God. We rarely experience God. We can start to see God if we train ourselves to. So much of our world, we completely take it for granted. And we don't see what a miracle, a flower and gravity and love and children and all these things. That the sky is still up there, that we're still breathing, that weather comes and goes. These are all miracles. Okay? It's just amazing how beautiful this world has been designed for us. We don't see it anymore because we become oblivious to it. But we can train ourselves. We can train ourselves to see those things and to see God. And likewise, when they saw thunder, right? What was the sound at the mountain? It was the rumbling, it was the thunder, it was the sound of a shofar, right? And where you want to sort of try to get to, where we aspire to, is that when we hear a shofar, and it like wakes us up, right? We want to go even higher to where it's like we could almost see the energy that's coming out of a shofar, like where we could see those sound waves. I'm not talking about defying physics and seeing sound with our eyes. I'm saying that spiritually speaking, we want to get to a place, right, where God is as apparent to us here in this world as it was to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai when they saw the thunder and the sound of the shofar. We'll be blowing that again a lot when we approach Rosh Hashanah. But here, when we're receiving the Torah and Torah portion, Yitro, the people saw the thunder and the great sound and the growing sound of the shofar around the mountain. Okay. Lastly, per Rav, just like we can say a blessing in our own language, as long as we mention God and God's sovereignty, the thing we're blessing for, likewise, the Shema, the Amidah, and the grace after meals can be said in our own language, but it is better, right, if we strive to learn so that we can say it in the tongue of our ancestors, in the holy tongue. Okay, that is what we had for today. Let's think about what the takeaway is. What is the takeaway? The takeaway must be, right, that when we plug into blessings, we're plugging into an energy, just like we mentioned the other day on Tu B'Shvat, right? Every person is a tree with our roots in heaven. We're constantly being animated by the water of blessing, the spiritual blessing that's flowing from heaven into us, right? And if that blessing kind of just comes into us and stays there, so we're alive, but we don't let it go through us, so then we haven't done our job, right? To make blessings go through us means that, first of all, we perform good deeds, right? The life that animates us should animate us to do good. And one way to do good is to be thankful when we eat something and to say that blessing out loud so other people can hear it, so they can say, oh, okay, this person is thankful. This person is making the Creator alive before me, and I'm going to be inspired to do the same thing. Right? When we are thankful for something we've been given and we say it aloud in front of others, that is a way for a blessing to go through us and affect not only ourselves, but the people around us as well. All right, I'm just going to scroll back to see if there are any questions. Not seeing. Yeah. Okay. All right, not seeing anything near the end here. So, my pals, it is great to share this with you. It is great to receive the blessings that I feel I'm getting and to share them with you so that it's a flow and we're in the flow together. May we be blessed to learn something of value every day and even more blessed to share it with someone we care about. Sending you big love from LA. Oh, and I just noticed I voted. I voted, and you should vote too. I live in California. I do a mail-in ballot, so I've actually voted already. So my vote will be in on Super Tuesday, and I recommend that everybody get involved, right? We live in a time when voting matters very much. Be part of it. All the best, my holy brothers and sisters. Take care.